Does the quality of how an athlete moves matter? Like, they may be able to still perform well even if they've got fairly poor quality of movement, but you'd want to, as a coach, try to improve the quality of their movement. I don't think there's any instance where we wouldn't try to improve how an athlete moves. It's not just about the quantity, it's not just about the numbers, the outcome. We want to improve how they get there too, yeah? Because by improving how they get there, we may have a positive effect on their outcome, but we also probably have a positive effect on how sustainable they are. We're just not just in the performance game, we're also in the health game, right? Quality really matters. So if everyone says, yeah, quality matters, the next question, obvious one, is what do we mean by quality? You guys given this much thought before? Like, you know quality matters, but what is it actually? If we say it matters, okay, I'm become a coach, I think the way in which you do a clean, I want to see that good. I want it to look good. I'm coaching you to have that clean look of high quality. Not just so you can clean 200 kilos, but what you look like when you do it, or what you look like when you squat, or deadlift, or sprint, or accelerate. How you do it really matters, not just the number that we're reaching. But what is that? How would we define quality? This would be a long presentation. I'll get into the nitty-gritty of it. I'm not going to do that today. This is how I define it. I use 5 words kind of to define this. Effective, a high-quality movement is one which attains the goal. It's effective. It's efficient, meaning it attains that goal in very little cost, or as low cost as possible. It's stable, meaning you can do it over and over again within an environment that doesn't change a lot, like track and field. And it's adaptable, meaning you can do it over and over again in an environment that does change a lot, like in football. So those are the 4 sort of primary determinants of the words that I use to help me understand what I mean when I say I want to improve the quality of how you move. Is it effective? Is it efficient? Is it stable? And is it adaptable? I think there's another one that's probably more important than all of them. And that's, is it authentic? What do you guys think I mean by authentic here? Or what would you mean?
I want to say it's using another word for, like, is it functional and real for the athlete?
Is it functional and real for you as an individual? Yeah, I like that a lot. Anyone differ with that? I think that's a really good one. Because no individual is the average of all individuals. Every individual that you coach is an individual. Every single one of them. That's really obvious when you're coaching a 300-pounder and a 150-pounder. They're 2 very, very different people. You coach them very differently. You'd expect them to move in very, very different ways. It's not as obvious when you're looking at the 2 200-pounders that may look the exact same, but they're still individuals. They move in very different ways. They have different things, so they will move those different things in different ways. Authenticity. We all move differently. We need to understand what we mean by that. This is my very, very basic definition. It's their true expression of their identity. So how do we use the 1080 based upon, or how do we, let's not even look at that yet. How do we use the 1080 typically? Let's say to improve acceleration, because that's what I'm talking about today. How to improve acceleration. What do we typically do? What do you guys do?
Run with heavy load.
Run with heavy load, okay? Where did you get that information from? Or is that just, I'm going to use a resistance machine, I'm going to load it up, so that's...
Seems logical.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It seems very logical. What else? How much load?
I like to use VDECs.
Okay. VDECs. Anyone doesn't know what a VDEC is?
Velocity decrement.
Velocity decrement. So that goes back to Matt Cross's paper, 2017-18. I think he started, maybe his first research was published in 2016. This paper was published in 2017, I think. Yeah, 2017. This is when he started first talking about VDEC, the decrement in velocity, or in V0. And this is where the whole 50% came from, right? How many of us here used 50% when we saw this paper? Or when we saw J.B. Moran starting talking about this work? I know I did. So that is you maximizing power at 50% of the decrement in velocity, or the theoretical decrement in velocity. So what we had, and then we've had a 1080 for 12 years, I think, about then. So we were using it, and we saw this great work from JB and Matt Cross and a couple others who were playing in the space at that time. And we had some fast guys. And we found that we were maxed out on the 1080 during accelerations for almost all of our males. All accelerating or trying to accelerate with 30 kilos. And all grinding and just being able to still be fast. And kind of still looks like acceleration, looks like sprinting. It looked pretty good. Like these are really, really fast, sometimes big and strong guys. But almost to a man and to a woman, they got worse. Almost every single one of them got worse. For probably the 2 years that I started like really trying to implement this 50% decrement of velocity strategy. Why do you think that is?
Mechanics? They turn into pushers, not sprinters? I don't know.
Kind of, right? I mean, that's kind of what, it goes back to what we were talking about before. They're individuals. What makes an elite sprinter an elite sprinter? Where are they? They're here. Huge forces, but really early on contact. And what am I doing by forcing them to, or what am I doing by increasing the load up to 30 kilos for these guys?
Teach them to run how they don't like to run.
I'm putting them this way. That's going to make them slower. So I just made a bunch of really elastic, stiff sprinters more compliant and more grindy. So they got stronger. They actually got better at 30 kilo 1080 resistant runs. So if we had some races that we could set up like that, it would have been great. But they got slower. And I said, oh man, I'm thinking I just messed up the programming or I messed up something. And it wasn't until a couple years later I said, I'm done with this. And I started lightening the load, 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 and just figured out through trial and error that this is not the way. Why does this work for Matt Cross? Why does it work for, at this point, 6 or 7 or 8 additional papers either done by JB or Samazino? Why would it? Why would this be appropriate?
He's pushing for 5 steps.
That's one reason. They're not going long enough. What would be another reason? Maybe they're training all people who are over here. And that's what it is. It's a bunch of soccer players that can't run. They don't know what they're doing. So and most of them can't push well. So you teach a soccer player to push a little bit better, they'll get better. You'll see a transference from that resisted run to the unresisted run. %90 of the research done by JB, and I love JB, by the way, he's a good friend of mine. So I'm not going down on JB, but most of it is misleading when you're not working with that specific population. And I think it's taken people way off what they should be thinking about. They've been thinking about quantity rather than quality. They've been coaching through the numbers rather than what they see. They've been coaching through the outcome rather than how athletes actually get to that outcome. The outcome's important. At the end of the run, it's important what number is there. How they get there is just as important, and in many cases, it's more important. For me, back in 2017 and 18, I fell victim to this. I was chasing the number instead of how they got to that number. And how often do we make this mistake in not just our use of the 1080, but every other piece of tech that we've got? Like more and more and more, we're seeing this now, right? Especially the use of force platforms. When I was a young coach, force platforms were $50,000 to buy an old Kistler force platform, so nobody had them. There was one basically in the entire country where I was. We definitely didn't. Well, we did have it. It was in the human performance lab, but we weren't allowed to use it. It was a bunch of idiot strength coaches. But now they're $5,000. And almost every sports performance center has got one. Every team has multiples of them. And they're looking at hundreds of metrics within it and starting to chase the metrics rather than understanding those metrics are just proxies for the performance of their sport. Let's always think bigger picture. What are we trying to actually improve here? How they play the game. So these two papers are a little bit more recent. Obviously, you can't read these. On the left is Cam Joss's paper that he published this past year, 2025. Cam's with the Detroit Lions, assistant strength and conditioning coach there. His PhD supervisor is J.B. Moran. He did basically the exact same work as Matt Cross did almost a decade previous. But now, rather than a bunch of really crappy soccer players, he did it with NCAA football players. 123 football players. Typically, if you're playing in a pretty elite NCAA program, you're a good mover. Like these guys, most of them move really, really well, right? You don't get to that level if you're not a good mover. You don't get to that level if you're not super powerful and can move and can sprint. Very different from soccer, they suck. Especially the ones that Matt Cross is working with, right? This is a very different population. The paper on the right is Byron Donaldson, did his PhD, he's finished his PhD now, he's with the Cincinnati Reds. He's one of their sports science guys based in Cincinnati. He did his PhD with Helen Bain, South African biomechanist, and they looked at how the athletes got to the positions. So for so long, decades, we've done a pretty good job of understanding outcomes, kinetics. We haven't done a really good job of understanding the process, the kinematics, how people got to the outcome. Because we really haven't had the technology to really understand it well. We do now. We have had that over the course of the last 8-10 years. Helen Bain and Byron Donaldson, there's 3 really good papers here, by the way. This one was published in 2024, I think. There's another one in 2022, and there's another one in 2025, which correlated much of what he was finding with his coordination patterns here in the first 4 steps with different capacities. So you looked at how those correlated with a isometric mid-thigh pull, with a counter movement jump, and a Nordic. Just for fun. Which one correlated the strongest with steps 2, 3, and 4? Of those 3, CMJ, isometric mid-thigh pull, or Nordic? Rank them. CMJ was first by a long shot. Mid-thigh pull was second. Nordic, no surprise to probably everybody in the room, did not correlate 1 iota to anything, to anybody, whether from outcome perspective or coordination perspective. I mean, not that surprising when you're only looking at the first 4 steps. We'll get back into a little bit of Byron's work a little bit later, but I want to talk about Cam's work a little bit more. What's one of the challenges you have when you're doing a research project with 123 football players or 123 athletes, especially in football? They're all different. His lightest player was 180 pounds. His heaviest player was double that. Down here we've got, this is a very, very different strategy than this. Really different. 3 big take-homes, heuristics from Cam's work. Theoretical maximum velocity is much, much more important than theoretical maximal force for lighter, more skilled, and faster accelerators. Make sense? Of course it does. It's the opposite for heavier, less skilled accelerators. So the lighter and faster the player, the lighter the resistance should be. And that sounds really obvious until we actually comes out to using the 1080 and we got a little light guy and we say, all right, we're going to get you stronger, so we're going to jack it up to 30 kilos and have you do accelerations with 30 kilos. That's not that cat's pattern. It's not how he moves. So what should we do with the light guy? So first we have to ask the question, what are we actually trying to improve here? This is how I break down the locomotion gait. into 3 interacting patterns, from hip extension to hip flexion to how then we interact with the ground. And that takes us through the entire pattern. And then the movement of everything that's kind of above the middle of the thigh. I'm calling that the spinal engine pattern. So we know the hips oscillate and they undulate. We know the shoulders counter-oscillate and they counter-undulate. We know the spine that connects the two rotates, it laterally flexes, and it extends and flexes as well. So you've got this as we're running, right? Or doing any movement. All of this is operating. We also, on top of that, we've got femurs that externally rotate as they extend and internally rotate as they flex. And all of that together, and maybe for upper body sports like baseball, you can also include the humerus as well, and how that comes back, externally rotates and internally rotates into flexion as well. All of that together is really important. The spinal engine for me is almost kind of governs resonance. It governs how quickly you can move through these patterns, quickly, effectively, and efficiently. If you don't have an efficient spinal engine pattern, you try to go faster, and everything just starts breaking down, right? It just looks discoordinated. But if you can have a spine that moves well, and this moves well, and this moves well, and this moves well, you can handle those increases in velocity. I don't think we know a ton yet about kind of all this and how it works and operates together. What I can tell you, it's really important. Really important. There's a few researchers now doing some work on this. I think it's going to be a thing in the next sort of 4, 5, 6 years when much of that research comes out and we can understand it better, understand how to train it better. At this point, it's really important. Now we just got to figure out what to do with that. We're going to focus on the other 3. This is kind of how I use it to improve hip extension. Remember, hip extension is a capacity. This is really easy. This is just good programming. Figure out some ways in which you can use it to try to improve the ability for you to move the center of mass from here to there as fast and as far as possible. To help us make that decision, we have to know each individual. If the individual is a 360-pound offensive lineman, he applies high forces, but it takes him a hell of a long time to do it, I can jack him up. I can put some really, really high resistance on there. If it's a limiter, if it's a problem, maybe I'll go a little bit lower. If I look at P-max, and there's a lot of stuff about P-max. I forgot to talk about this with Cam. The fat guys, the big guys, so the bigs, 90% correlation between P-max and their 10-meter time. What about the skills? Higher or lower than 90%? Yeah, about 60%. And these guys, their P-max comes from where? It's coming from velocity. These guys, it's coming from force. Pretty simple. But we know if we're just looking at P-max and we know that's only correlating 60%, okay. For the big guys, it's a lot more important. So we use resisted accels. And for our really, really twitchy guys, I've got 2 guys right now who are really twitchy, really elastic. I'm stronger than both of them in the weight room. I remind them of that every day. They're a little bit faster than I am, by the way. What would I use as a resistance on the 1080?
Lighter.
Really light. Yeah, like light. How light? I would never go into double figures with these guys on the resisted accelerations. And almost always in variable resistance too, so it drops off as they start increasing the velocity. I've got one girl who's not twitchy at all. She's not stiff. She's pretty strong. She's pretty powerful. She applies big, big forces. What do I do with her? A little bit more? Yeah. Well, that's it. It gives me at least a decision, because not necessarily, right? Because she's actually not very fast. She's okay. She's ran 11:07. But to get faster, to actually be like somebody in the sport, I need to work on some of the weaknesses with her. So for her, I might not do any resisted acceleration, right? Because she's already overly compliant and takes too long to apply force. So it might be more elastic strength. It might be more assisted work. With her, it's not necessarily about the hip extension pattern. It's around the foot and ground interaction pattern. Skips for distance, I'm a big, big fan of. Like massive fan of skips. Because there's so many different ways that you can manipulate a skip. You can do it fast, you can do it far. You can do a big, big range of motion. You can do it really slow with heavy resistance. You could do light resistance and do super fast. You can do low recovery. You can do high recovery. There's so many different ways that you can manipulate a skip. We skip every single day. People are getting tired of me talking about skips. That's okay. I'll keep doing it. Super lunges, which is basically, I'll show you on the next video actually. And then bounds, just variations of different bounds. So this is how we try to improve that, depending on whether that issue with that is, remember there are four capacities here: force, velocity, range, and repeatability or endurance. So where is the issue? Is it a force problem? Most kids, you can become better accelerators if you just improve their force capacity. So they go further with each step. Is it a velocity problem? Is it a range problem? In soccer, it's mostly range. In baseball, it's often range. And is it repeatability or endurance? So it just gives you kind of a matrix of where to go. You have to ask, what is it about this pattern that is problematic? This is what we call a super lunge. It's something we put at the end of the warm-up prior to doing acceleration work, like working on that step 0. So the double is basically the same thing, but now you're pulling through that second step as well and then rolling it out. So you're driving as fast as you can, and before impact, you're pulling that second step forward as fast as possible. So the ability to do this well, I think, is a really good KPI for almost all team sport athletes. And you can, I mean, if you don't have a 1080, there's a zillion ways you can do this. Do it with a band. Do it with a sled. Do it up a hill. Do it without anything. Do it with a band behind, somebody holding the band behind you. And then the double one is just there, and then you're pulling through that second step as fast as you can. So that's kind of the hip extension pattern. That is, we'll go a little bit heavier on this because this is working only on the step 0. So where there's, you're going from 0 velocity to velocity. So this is 10 kilos, and most of the steps 2, 3, 4, and onwards with this person specifically is 8 kilos. So I can load this just a little bit more. Is that right, Adam? This was 10 kilos, right? Like, would you foresee a point in time where a player could get hurt doing this? Like, highly doubtful. Highly doubtful. Like, I don't know I'm old as hell. I can do it right now 100 times. Like, we do this really early. We don't just do it late, but you can do this all the time. You can do a hard 5-meter acceleration 10 minutes into a warm-up, 8 minutes into a warm-up, right? Because you're not at the velocity yet where it's really that potentially problematic. So I think with acceleration specifically, or especially, I think we can do way more accels than we think, and we can do them way earlier than we think. What is acceleration? It's the horizontal projection of the center mass as fast and as far as we possibly can. How do we do that? We do that by extending the hip. So that means either we push the foot back or we drive the opposite thigh forward. Those 3 sentences, like, commit those to memory. That's everything about acceleration. What is it? Horizontal projection of the center mass as fast and as far as I possibly can. How do I do it? Extending the hip. It's the only way to do it. How do I extend the hip? I either push back or I pull forward. Everything, if you're doing an acceleration session, every single thing in your warm-up should be warming up to do that. But what does a warm-up typically look like? Oh, we're going to go for a jog, and we'll do this, and we'll do this. And we get all this stuff that's got nothing to do with the horizontal projection of center mass fast and as far as possible. First thing you should do is start moving the center mass and try to connect center mass projection with hip extension, pushing back or driving forward. We can do that immediately. Like I said, we can do some 5-meter accels pretty early. You don't have to do them all out, but we can start that right now. We can skip right now. We can do some lunging right now. We can do these super lunges right now. We can do all of these things that's going to develop this capacity to horizontally project the center mass as fast and as far as possible, almost without a warm-up, immediately. So to answer your question, I know it gets chaos, right? So if you only got a 1080, you've got 80 players, and you're waiting to the end, and everyone's lining up, just find ways to do it. You don't need a 1080 for it. You just use bands, you use whatever. Typically what we've had when we're doing it in here, we just set up bands, and we're sitting with a band here, and just boom, and coming back. And we'll complex that with different, like, reverse lunges or step-ups or whatever, do something a little bit more dynamic, working on that, a little bit more explosive. S&C 101, first day of S&C school, we learn about this. This is the magnitude of a load, this is the frequency of a load. If you're working on your maximum deadlift, super high magnitude, If it's super high magnitude, what's the frequency? So we're working on getting our deadlift really, it's a 1 RM deadlift. We're going to do, our training session today is 8 doubles at 95 to 97%. That's high magnitude, right? How frequently are we going to do that workout? Not very frequent, right? So it's down here somewhere. So the magnitude of that work, maximum strength work, is here. What is that what I just did? That's super lunge. What is the magnitude of that load? How hard is that from a load perspective on the system? Pretty low, right? Like it's not that hard. So that's something we can do frequently. So the frequency is here. So that's probably here somewhere, and that probably sits right about in the middle. We can do and acceleration is the same. Basketball players accelerate hard every single day. They play basketball. They're accelerating hard every single day, hundreds of times. But because you don't get up to a really high terminal velocity, the load to the entire load to the system isn't really that high. So as I said, just look for more opportunities to accelerate. Look for more opportunities to horizontally project your center of mass as fast and as far as you possibly can with all of the things that you do. It doesn't have to be a sprint, doesn't have to be a super lunge or a bound or whatever. Just think about other ways you can do that, other ways you can load it.